Welcome to When Not Yet Becomes Right Now, the podcast where we dive deep into the moments of transformation, the times when not yet shifts into right now and everything changes. I'm your host, Jen Ginty, and this podcast is all about those pivotal moments in our life journeys. You know the ones when the hesitation fades, when we take that first step, even if it feels like a leap. It's in these moments that growth and healing begins. Each episode will explore stories of resilience, moments of clarity, and the sparks that ignite real change. From personal experiences to expert insights, we'll uncover how people navigate the complex journey we call life and come out stronger on the other side. Whether you're searching for that spark in your own life or just curious about how change unfolds for others, you're in the right place. We'll discuss the ups and downs, the breakthroughs and setbacks, and how to embrace the right now, even when it feels out of reach. Because sometimes the hardest part of the journey is realizing that the moment you've been waiting for has already arrived. So take a deep breath, settle in, and let's get started. Hello, welcome to When Not Yet Becomes Right Now. I'm Jen, and today we're speaking with Natalie Jovanic. Natalie is a registered master therapeutic counselor and trauma recovery coach who specializes in helping individuals worldwide who have experienced trauma and loss. They use an integrative approach to trauma recovery, combining IFS-informed parts work, somatic approaches, EMDR, and anti-oppressive practices. Additionally, Natalie provides leadership coaching to promote healthy and inclusive workspaces. Natalie is also the author of the memoir A Brave True Story, where they share their personal journey of healing from child abuse, and she's the host of the podcast Trauma Demystified. Welcome, Natalie. So glad you're here.
Thank you, Jen. I'm very happy to be here, and I'm really looking forward to our conversation.
Me too. So let's get into it. What is the story behind your not yet, your background, and where you'd like to start the story?
Let's start the story. Like the story has many different layers, and there were different not yets. So I think one of the big not yets were the journey for myself to start my own healing journey from childhood abuse. And like I started in my 30s after I ended a relationship. However, well, looking back now, in my family, there was so much stigma against counseling, and I couldn't imagine that healing was possible. So I had grown up in an environment where there was not really any kind of positive outlook on healing. So I started after the end of the relationship because I wanted to have children, and I didn't want to give my past baggage onto a child. At this stage, I was living in Germany, but then I moved to Spain. So I did a lot of my healing in Spain. And I also think Spanish culture was very supportive for healing because it's a more emotional culture and it's a very relationship focused culture. And so I used a lot of systemic constellation work for healing. I did inner child work. I did also like all the somatic, like getting back to my body.
Systemic constellations are a way to understand and solve personal or family problems by looking at how everything is connected. In a session, people use other participants or objects to represent family members or important parts of their life. This helps them see hidden patterns or issues that may be causing problems, like family conflicts or past traumas. By seeing these connections more clearly, they can find new ways to heal and bring balance to their relationships or life.
And then at this stage, I started my own training, and I started off with systemic coaching and also systemic constellation, which is a 3 years education where you really work very deeply with your bodies and with what has happened to you. And also it can help you to work through more intergenerational trauma, because if I look at the stories of my family, there was also historic trauma that they just carried forward in our family dynamic. And yeah, and so the not yet was always like, when do I start? How do I start? And so my first collaboration with a therapist wasn't very successful. I felt very pathologized, and I think we had intense power dynamics, and she couldn't explain me anything what trauma was. And she couldn't explain me like some of the symptoms I had. Like I used to use self-injury in relationships when there was heated conflict and my boundaries were violated. And so she always pathologized it, but she never explained me that there's a symptom of trauma and that we can work with this. So it was a very weird dynamic. When I started with systemic work, and the first time that came the concept of parts work in a child, it really resonated with me, because internally I think I was aware that my inner world was, I'm not sure whether comparison, more fragmented. Like I could resonate with fragmented parts. When I was younger, I read a memoir from somebody who was diagnosed with DID, and what really resonated with me was the different parts, and like I was aware of them, so I don't live with DID, but it was really helpful for me to understand, oh, fragmentation is really something that other people also experience,
Yes.
not only me.
Yeah. Dissociative identity disorder, or DID, is a mental health condition where a person has two or more distinct identities or personalities that take control at different times. Each identity may have its own name, behavior, and memories. DID often happens as a way for someone to cope with trauma, especially in childhood. People with DID may feel disconnected from themselves or have memory gaps about things they've done. Therapy can help them manage the condition and understand their different identities. And I have the same discovery. When I
Mhm.
started with my therapist, I had no idea what internal family systems was. And she immediately said, it's not DID. It's
Yes,
something
and
completely different. I would love for you to tell us a little bit more about the systemic side of things, and talk a little bit about the intergenerational. That for me is another part that has been difficult that I've been working through.
yes, like I think what I'm noticing, so first of all, like I'm German Croatian. My mother was German, fully German. My father, like he is German, but he has a Croatian last name. And my parents were united in hatred. But I think as some of the hatred, yes, there was discrimination from my mother towards my father, and my father was violent. So like there was a lot of different dynamics, and both of them lived through the war, and both of them were kind of disconnected from their emotions. My father's father died by suicide, but they never talked about it. So I only know it because my mother shared this with me. And so a lot of these bigger family dynamics, it took me a long time to understand them. It took me a long time to find out who am I, and like accepting my Croatian side, because like my father never talked about it. But if I now look back, I'm aware that my last name is associated with Croatian. And so in Germany, there is a certain disconnect for some people, and they create stories about me. And even now that I live abroad, Germans don't see me as German because of my last name. And if I connect with Croatians, it's difficult because I don't speak the language. So there were many. So in systemic work, you can constellate your inner family pictures. And so it's more or less you put in an intention what you want to look at, and then the systemic elements can show up. So I did a constellation with my parents, and I did a constellation also with Croatia as a country. And it really explained to me the grief I was feeling, that I didn't have any roots with Croatia. And so in this context, the systemic work helped me, like some of these deep inner emotions and body sensations that I felt, to express them and internalize them. And then in systemic work, you find healing phrases. So what are phrases, how you can heal yourself? So in my family, I think as it's common, like I was taking responsibility for my mother's emotions. So my mother had um, cancer all the time that I can remember her. And she had also, like, it was on her face. So people were kind of staring at her. And like for me, I learned to take care of her emotions, and she was always more important than I was. And so in family systems, you can, not internal family systems, but in it, like internal family system is something different than systemic constellations.
Could you explain what constellations is?
So constellations is a methodology that was developed by Bert Hellinger. And so it was combined of, I think it's psychology, but it's also he was a missionary in an African country. I think it's Zulu, but I could be wrong. So he combined this methodology based on different ideas, and then he created the thing. And so in a family constellation, it's usually a group work. Like you can do it internally and just work with yourself and a therapist. But like if you do it in a big group, so I, for example, one was that I worked on the relationship with my father. So I would say my intention is to heal the relationship with my father. And then I would choose people who represent the different people. So I would choose somebody who represents my father. I would choose somebody who represents my mother and anything else that might come up. And so this was really helpful for me to understand in a picture. So what showed up in one picture was my own sense of powerlessness because of the violence that happened in my family. So I'm my nervous system was used to be in a fawn or freeze response, and so it really showed up in a constellation. And so then we worked with this dynamic, and it helped me to see it and understand what was happening inside of me, because I wasn't fully aware that I was in a freeze or fawn response, or that I felt that powerless. And then we used healing phrases just to heal this inner picture that I had, because it was kind of more painful. But then how can we find a better picture, and how can we find a picture that gives freedom? So it helps to acknowledge what is, it helps to express the emotions that we may not have expressed, and it helps us to find a way to move forward.
Okay.
I know.
So the constellation, and you said it to look at the overall picture. So the constellation makes a picture for
Yes.
you. Okay. And what does the
So
picture represent?
it represents the dynamic that is inside of me, that and like the people that I choose, like if you are, for like the person who was representing my father had certain emotions, so it helps to express something that I may consciously not be able to express, and it helps you just to see in a dynamic that we usually in a story wouldn't tell. So like I was aware that for me something was going on with the country of Croatia, but I wasn't aware that it was a lot of pain for me. And I, like, because the rational part of me couldn't understand, like, I've never been there, so why should it be there? But like it really helped me to integrate that and find a more combined view on that. And a lot of systemic work is really inner child work and working with those younger parts of us. And so it has different aspects to it. And so this is a bit, but like you can do it either individually or in a group.
Okay. So you started the work on the childhood trauma.
Yeah.
And what was the moment for you that was like, I have to do this work or I'm not going to be able to move forward?
It's interesting. I think, okay, it was the moment when like I asked my ex-partner at one stage, "Hey, let us do couples counseling because I don't know anymore how to move forward." And when I asked him in the relationship, he said no, he does never want to do this and it's not his problem. And the funny thing is, a couple of years earlier, when his friends did couples counseling, he said to me, "Oh, he would always do it for our relationship." And so when he said no, it was like I lost trust in him. And so a couple of months later, I just didn't know anymore how to proceed. So I broke up with him, and then suddenly he had changed his mind. He wanted to do couples counseling, and I just sat there and I knew I couldn't do it with him and I wouldn't go back into the relationship. It was also not the healthiest one. So I said no in the relationship session to counseling, but immediately afterwards I did my own because I knew I had something to do with myself. Like for me at this stage, when we had a lot of fights in our relation, not was it arguments in the relationship, and if I said stop to him, like if he was yelling and I would say stop and he wouldn't respect it, I would dissociate. And
Yes.
then I also, like, for me, if I use self-injury, I use self-injury to come back into my body. And I was aware in those moments about his, I know now, like I know it's stigma, but like he was quite stigmatizing in these moments. But I also knew I had something to look at, if this makes
Okay.
sense.
So, yeah. So you realized your relationship was not going to work.
No.
He started off by saying, no, I don't want to do this work with you. And when you said goodbye, he was like, wait, 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 let's do the
Yes.
work, right? Yeah.
Yes.
And that is a big red flag, right?
It's a big red flag, and I need to say I'm this type of person. If I say no, it's a no. like I can work on a relationship, and I think afterwards he can, like he was kind of blaming me a bit, but like he was more, oh, I should have clearly told him that I would leave if he says no, but I'm not the type of person who says to someone, either we do this or I leave. Like, I don't know, I will never be this way.
Yeah,
Like, and so I knew there were boundaries for me that I couldn't cross. And so for me, when he said no, I lost trust in him and in our relationship.
makes sense. Absolutely. So, when you were working through your childhood trauma, did you realize that it was something that was going to be a long process for you? Was what was the feeling, the overall feeling you had while you were just getting into your healing journey?
Okay, I need to say one thing. Okay, I would say I did a little bit of healing before because I was aware, like, I left home when I was 19 on the day my mother died because the violence in our home escalated. And so after that, I went through a profound grief period. And then also, I cut ties with my father. Like in the beginning, I'd hoped that he might change, and then I cut ties with him. But I think each of these small steps were a step of liberation and necessary for me to do my own healing, because it's hard to confront the childhood if the people are still, if they were still in my life. So for me, there was small steps of healing, and I read a lot of self-help book at this area, and they gave me a new perspective. So the intense healing was after I left my partner, and then honestly, I did a lot of things. So I did um like I went to a psychiatrist. That was the process in the country I lived in. And then I got a psychologist. This didn't work that well for me with this psychologist. Like just didn't work for me. But I also, I educated myself around boundaries, and I started systemic work in parallel to psychotherapy. And so then when I moved to Spain, I continued with, um, I think it was a CBT more based counseling. And then I did systemic work, and I started meditation, I started yoga. And I did also more the alternative kind of healing things, just to have a more comprehensive view. And I also started to train as a coach. And the coaching I did was very much was based on parts work, which fitted well for me.
When we spoke before, we talked about that you had multiple
Hmm.
journeys, and I think you really are someone who is a great example of that. What would you say was that second journey that you felt you needed
Hmm.
to go? What's the background of that?
Okay, my second journey was when I moved to Canada. And like on at this stage already was aware, I had an awareness what healthy environments are, I had an awareness what diversity and inclusion is. So I moved to Canada with the hope that it would be very diverse, and they would really live it. And then it really unraveled in many, like, first of all, immigration was a really difficult process for me. And like living in Spain was very easy for me, but coming to Canada I had a lot of barriers, and I didn't expect them to be that bad. And then I came out as non-binary, and I need to say, like, I think I always was like not unsure about gender, but I was aware that the idea of being a woman didn't resonate, though there is so much stigma associated if you have experienced sexual abuse. So I was never really sure, don't I just not feel like a woman because I have been sexually abused, or is it really because I'm not? So at that stage, I had the confidence that I was aware, no, it has nothing to do with the sexual abuse. I'm not a woman. And I came out as non-binary, and I lost everyone I knew at the moment I came out. And then I faced also this, like, I don't know, the harassment from society. So I wanted to create a group for other queer folks and allies so that we can hang out and just have meaningful conversation. So in the first, there came a woman, and she felt kind of weird to me. And afterwards, I asked her, like, what is her role in allyship? And then she more or less told me that she wants to see me dead. And she wrote me a long kind of email on what a horrific human being I am because of my gender identity.
Was this person someone who you said you had started a group? Was this someone who
Yes,
had
she
joined
showed
the
up.
group?
Yes, she entered the group. And then I spoke with other queer folks, and then they explained to me that this is commonly happening. So people, this is what I don't understand. So if I don't like a certain group, I don't show up to the meetings. And so I thought if I put in clearly for whom it is, that people like her wouldn't show up. But then I learned from other queer folks that's common. So you make a group for queer folks, but then people show up who are against you, just, I don't know what they want to do, to educate you about what they think about you. But like, so
Well,
these,
it sounds like it's kind of like she came in with hate.
yes.
Okay.
So I wasn't at this stage, I wasn't used to this open hatred. I also didn't think, like, I always said to people how I experience gender, so I hardly ever used the term woman. So I didn't expect that if I just use the label, what I'm supposed to be using, that people really cut me off immediately. And so this is what I didn't expect to be that bad, but it was. And so then I was in spaces that were really hostile, and then I just crushed. Like, I think my complete nervous system crushed together, and I had a really profound experience of systemic trauma where I knew that it was hard to find a way out because it was so nearly in every systems I was part of, whether in the workplace, whether in college. Like, I did study here again. And so I know there was this one moment when I said to myself, okay, I have no idea how you can work through this, but you healed sexual abuse. You will find a way to deal with that. And so I really went back into the practice and used all the kind of things that I really practiced for healing from my family dynamic to work with the systemic dynamics. Though, like, the aspect I would say that was different is it requires more boundaries. Like, I can walk away from my family, I can't walk away from society. So it's more like, how can I empower me in the context I am in? And so now my moment is a bit like, the healing was during COVID. So I found COVID quite nice because I didn't need to hang out with people. And now
I
the
think you
thing
weren't
is,
alone in that.
yeah. So, and now I'm in this kind of thing. Okay, now if I go to events and they are very much by, like, they're dominated by, I don't know, by cis people, like, it's really hard for me because either I'm constantly misgendered or I constantly correct them, or like, it is really kind of a weird thing. And I'm not fully sure how will people respond to me. And now I'm in this process. How can I be more social, go to events, still be empowered, and also not be crushed if I run into hatred?
Okay. So with that, where are you at right now? Do you think so? For me, when I think about my journeys that I take, they are ongoing, right? I feel as though, when people say, "Where are you at in your journey?" I tend to say I'm in the middle of it. And when 20 years down the road, I probably will still say I'm in the middle of it, right? How do you feel about where you're at with the systemic hatred, I guess you would call it?
Yes, like, we can call it oppression in a way. I think, okay, I would say I have worked through most of like the inner healing and the pain. And like, I think for me, the hard thing is, how can I accept something I'm not okay with? But to some degree, I have a far higher level of peace than I had in the past. Like, because if I fight with it, it won't go away. So I need, like, I think I found a good way for myself on how to navigate it. Um, and I also, like, I noticed the more I healed, the less I was affected when people go into hatred. Like, now I just walk away. There are certain things I don't need to listen to. So, but I think the work in progress is like this kind of alignment, because I'm noticing, like, for example, in my business, I have power because it is my business, and I'm aware, my clients are aware of it. So with my clients, it's a very different dynamic, and I feel more comfortable and I feel more safe than if I go into a new environment where I don't know anybody. And so this is, I think, like, the work in progress is how go I more into spaces that I don't know, and how am I more open, and when do I let them go again, and when do I try again, and how do I do this and still, so that my non-binary identity doesn't feel completely overpowered by everybody. So it's more like, how can I balance my inner experience with the outside world?
Okay, great. So, what would you give others? What would you tell them who are in a similar situation? How would you tell them to work on themselves so that they have a better understanding of when they go out into the world, how they will react?
I would say, okay, the first thing is always start where you are. Just be really honest. What do you notice in yourself? Like for me, what was really useful is understanding when do I have a trauma response? How is a trauma response influenced by the environment I am in? And then what tools do I have to get myself out of there? And then also for me, it's still like healthy boundaries is a really an important foundation to just also keep ourselves healthy. And the other thing is really find those tools and practices that give you, I would say, aliveness. Like I still do a lot of parts work and I speak with the part like that is hurt by society. I speak with the part that is angry at society and I give them space and I validate them because what they experience is valid. And then, with my parts, I try to find a solution on like, how can we do this in an empowered way?
It might be really helpful to uh, describe so that others can understand the whole parts theory and how they themselves can work on that for them.
Okay, so parts can be different things. So it can be younger selves of us, it can be patterns, it can be emotions, it can be behavior patterns or thoughts. So the idea is that we see these elements as parts of us and not all of us. So, for example, one of my parts that is influenced by society is a part that holds despair. And I know when the part shows up, there's a social dynamic going on that is not okay for the part. And so for me, for me, it works well when I attach animals to the part. So the part with the despair is an ostrich. So I have an ostrich pet at home. So I can put it somewhere in the room and I really look at it and I visualize putting the despair in it. And then we have a conversation, like, and the part is saying what it feels. And I acknowledge, yes, you're feeling this and this and this. And then I'm asking it, what do you need? And then it can tell me what it needs. And like sometimes it's things like giving it a hug. Sometimes it's things like, okay, forget about the world for one day. Let's go to the zoo and just have fun in the zoo. And so parts don't only need to have painful emotions. Like I also have a very happy inner child, and I sometimes ask her, "What do you want to eat?" And so it's really like finding out what you notice within you and connecting with these parts, because I think it's important so that we can work through our emotions and acknowledge our emotions and also learn what they tell us, because in the end, all of our emotions are an important signal. And so if the part's getting too intense, it can be finding some practices on how can we reduce the intensity, like how can we connect with our body, whether it's grounding and like in parts work, you can do practices in the body to just reduce the intensity so that I can have a meaningful conversation with it. Does this make
So,
sense?
yes, absolutely. And but it makes sense to me because I work with internal family systems. What would you say to someone who's just starting, who they're just getting used to this idea of having their parts, and all of these parts are there to protect us, right? Where do we go when we're first starting this out, when somebody's like, I don't know what parts I have. Who are the parts? What what how do I talk to them to understand who they are?
Like, I think the first step is in the evening or once a week, just reflect on yourself. What have you noticed within yourself? Like, are there certain emotions? Are there certain patterns? Are there certain things that you have noticed? And then you can sit down and just take a sheet of paper and ask, like, who's there? Like, sometimes if I feel a lot of different things, I just write down who's there. And then I just say, part one is saying this, part two is saying this, part three is saying this. And then we just have a conversation. And in general, what most people experience is when they start to acknowledge it and work through it, that they suddenly feel calmer and the inner turmoil is kind of lessened, if this makes sense. And so I think I would start to identify certain habits. So for example, even if somebody notices that they are always rational, see it as a part of you and see that okay, I assume there might be some emotional parts too somewhere, but like talk to the rational part and ask the rational part, what do you want to protect me from? Or what is your motivation? And what are you afraid might happen if you stop being rational all the time? So it's really like, it's a gentle way, and I think a lot of it is being curious about what's happening inside of us. And like, I think it's natural because we have parts that we just want to get rid of. But the truth, like the idea is to welcome all of our parts, have a connection with all of them, and start a healthy relationship with all of them.
Yeah, that sounds like a great way to start the whole
Yeah.
process. I mean, when I'm with my therapist and we're talking about the different parts of me, I sometimes find it really hard to hear them. We'll sit and, I'll listen, but I feel like there are many parts of me that don't really want to talk. They don't
Mm,
want to say what's going on with them and why they're reacting the way that they are reacting in the moment.
And that is fair. Like in this case, I just acknowledge the part and say, "Hey, I'm noticing you don't want to talk to me, and it's okay for me." And I would hope that one day you can let me know what you might need to talk to me, but I like respect the boundaries of the part. Like I think sometimes it's about setting boundaries with parts, and sometimes it's respecting the part where it's it. And like not all of our parts naturally trust us. Like there might be conflicting parts, and there might be parts that for several reasons don't trust us.
I think it's a very helpful way for me to understand where where I'm at different moments because of course different parts are going to show
Hmm.
up in those
Hmm.
different moments. And I highly recommend to the listeners, if you haven't read about internal family systems, you haven't heard about it, to definitely learn more about it. Like you said before, it's not dissociative identity
No.
disorder, which is what people commonly call having multiple personalities.
I know, and like be like the theory underneath, like especially when it comes to trauma and parts work, it is called structural dissociation. And so, as everything in life, it exists on a spectrum. And so, DID is one end of the spectrum, and then on the other hand, might be somebody who has no parts at all, which I don't believe is true because in the end, all of us have parts. But so be aware, like, and the idea in a way is also a protective mechanism from our brain to work through very painful experiences.
So tell me about the book. Tell the listeners
My
about your
book.
book.
Okay, I wrote my book because I was aware of the stigma, and the more I healed, the more I was aware I can't escape stigma. And on the other hand, I also don't think stigma is fair. So on one hand, I wanted to give people hope that healing is possible. And I know every one of us has a different healing journey. And on the other hand, I wanted to say, hey, yes, I am a mental health professional and I have a story. And without my story, I wouldn't even be in the profession. And so these were the reasons. Like the reason itself, I really decided to write it when I was in a systemic constellation, and the person in front said she wanted to heal sexual abuse, and then you could really hear how tense everything got in the room. And I didn't know how to say people that I like the tension isn't fair necessarily and not helpful to really support somebody through their healing journey. So this is a bit why I wrote my book. And it's in the end, it describes a bit the dynamic of my childhood, but most of it really my relationships after that, and also how the childhood abuse influenced my choices in relationships. Like I need to say, it took me a long time to realize it, but some of my ex-partners, I chose them because they felt better than my family dynamics. It doesn't mean they were healthy. But like, I think we naturally kind of try to find something that feels a bit better. It just may not still not be healthy. And then it describes my healing journey and the different things that I did in my healing.
So, Natalie, tell us where we can find you.
You can find me on my website. I have like my website is Bright Horizon Therapies. I also have a podcast that is called Trauma Demystified. And so people can reach out to me on the net at brighthorizontherapies.com if they want to reach out in contact. And yeah, and I'm also happy to answer any questions that we haven't clarified in our conversation.
Yeah, no, that's great. I want to thank you for coming on the podcast and for sharing so much of your story and the that we have different journeys. We have
Hmm.
multiple journeys in our lives. So I want to thank you for sharing those. And this has been a wonderful conversation.
Thank you very much, Jen, for having me. I appreciated that I was here.
Thanks. Natalie is a great example of how we can go on multiple healing journeys in our lives. And I truly appreciate that she has so many different ways that she has learned to cope and to help her to better understand her history, her trauma, and how she has pulled through and is now helping others to figure out their own healing journeys. Thank you so much for listening.